text arrived at 3:17 on a Sunday afternoon, and it contained exactly 9 words. "We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us." I read it twice, while sitting in the parking lot of a gas station outside Hickory, North Carolina, with a cup of bad coffee cooling in the cup holder, and 140 miles of highway still ahead of me. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat, pulled back onto the interstate, and drove home to a house I had spent 30 years paying for. Every suitcase I owned was sitting on the front porch when I got there. Not thrown, not scattered, arranged. Someone had lined them up along the brick steps with the handles turned the same direction, the way a hotel bellman arranges luggage for a guest who is checking out on schedule. Beside them sat cardboard boxes with my name written across the sides in black marker, and at the very end of the row, tilted slightly on the uneven stone, was my wife's rocking chair. Eleanor had rocked our son to sleep in that chair when he was small enough to fit in the crook of one arm. It had sat in the corner of our living room for 31 years. Now it was on the porch in the October wind, waiting to be hauled away like something nobody wanted anymore. My daughter-in-law opened the front door before I reached the top step. She had a coffee mug in one hand, and her arms folded across a blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She looked calm. She looked prepared. She looked like a woman crossing the last item off a list she had been working on all weekend. "The locksmith just left," Claire said. I looked at the new deadbolt. I looked at my son's car in the driveway. I looked at the neighbors across the street, pretending very hard not to watch. Then I nodded. "Of course," I said. "I'll cancel my direct deposits first thing tomorrow." Her smile froze for half a second. Just half. But I had spent 40 years reading faces across negotiating tables, and half a second is a long time when you know what you're looking for. Before she could recover, I added one more sentence. "One more thing. Do you know who really owns this house?" She laughed. My son laughed harder. "Dad," Nathan said, shaking his head like I was a child telling a story nobody believed. "Stop pretending." I didn't answer. There wasn't any point. Because in about 5 minutes I was going to get back in my truck and drive away, and in about 5 weeks the life they thought they owned was going to come apart in their hands, thread by thread, and not one of those threads would be pulled by me. I want you to stay with me for this one. Because this story is not really about a house. If stories like this mean something to you, take a second and subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell. Because I share these every week, and the ones that matter most are never the ones you expect. My name is Walter Ellison. I'm 68 years old. I'm a widower, a retired commercial real estate investor, and until that Sunday afternoon in October, I believed my son still knew the difference between love and entitlement. Apparently I was wrong. People imagine betrayal arrives with shouting, slammed doors, lawyers walking up a driveway with envelopes. The truth is much quieter than that. Sometimes betrayal arrives as a text message with a period at the end of it. Sometimes it arrives on a beautiful autumn afternoon, from someone whose first steps you photographed, whose fevers you sat up with, whose college tuition you paid in full without ever once mentioning the number out loud. Eleanor used to tell me something I never fully understood until that day. "Walter," she would say, "children don't become entitled overnight. It happens one sacrifice at a time." Back then I laughed. She never did. She wasn't teasing me. She was warning me. And I had 23 years to think about that warning, and I still managed to miss it right up until the moment I was standing on my own porch, looking at my luggage. I had been away since Friday morning at a veterans retreat in the mountains outside Asheville. No resort, no golf. 3 days in a rented lodge, helping men who had come home from places they didn't talk about, figure out how to volunteer at food banks and youth centers without feeling like they were being handled. I had done that retreat every October for 9 years. It was the only thing on my calendar I never rescheduled. Nathan knew exactly where I was. Friday morning before I left, I stopped by the kitchen and asked if he needed anything. "No, Dad." He'd smiled at me over the rim of his coffee. "Go enjoy yourself." Claire had hugged me at the door. She had not hugged me in 2 years, and I remember thinking about it on the drive up, turning it over, letting myself be pleased about it. "Drive safe," she'd said. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing prepared me for what was waiting on Sunday. I noticed it before I even reached the porch. The landscaping crew hadn't come, and they always came Saturday. The fountain in the circle drive wasn't running. There was a moving truck parked beside the garage with its rear door rolled up, and two men in work gloves carrying my things out of my house. They wouldn't look at me, not one of them. The older man, gray at the temples, mumbled something as he passed with a box of picture frames. "Sorry, sir." That was when I understood there had been no misunderstanding. I parked and got out and stood there for a moment, in the driveway of the house I had bought. Out of foreclosure 18 years earlier, the house I had put a new roof on and new plumbing under and 2 years of my life into. And I did the only thing I have ever known how to do when the ground moved. I got quiet. Claire came down 2 steps to meet me. She had rehearsed this, you could hear it. "Walter," she said. She hadn't called me Dad since the 2nd year of their marriage. "I think it's better if we do this peacefully." "What exactly are we doing?" She handed me an envelope. Inside was a glossy brochure. Photographs of smiling silver-haired people playing cards. Private apartments. Restaurant-style dining. Scheduled transportation. Memory care available. I looked up from it. "You booked me into a retirement community. We reserved a unit. I didn't ask for one." Nathan appeared behind her then, hands buried in his pockets, and he couldn't hold my eyes for more than a second at a time. "Dad, no." He looked briefly relieved, then confused. "Don't start with Dad," I said. "Just tell me what's actually happening." He took a breath like a man about to read from a card. "We've been talking with a family counselor." "I didn't know that. You weren't supposed to." Claire stepped forward. "The counselor believes healthier boundaries are necessary." I almost smiled. "The counselor has met me?" Silence. "No," Nathan admitted. "So a professional diagnosed me without ever hearing my voice." Neither of them answered. Claire crossed her arms and went to the list she'd clearly prepared. "You've become emotionally dependent." "Have I? You call too often." "I call twice a week. You always want family dinners." "I host Sunday dinner, in my own dining room." "You expect too much." I nodded slowly, the way you nod at a man across a table who has just offered you 40 cents on the dollar and thinks you don't know it. "I see." Nathan found his voice again. "Dad, we need our own lives. I never stopped you. You pay for everything." And there it was. That sentence didn't hurt. I want to be honest about that, because it would be a better story if it did. It didn't hurt, it explained. Somewhere along the way, over 15 or 20 years of quiet transfers and unmentioned invoices, my generosity had stopped being something I gave and started being evidence against me. After Eleanor died, I made myself a promise that my son would never lie awake doing arithmetic the way I had at his age. So I paid tuition, his first car, graduate school, their wedding, all of it, down to the string quartet Claire wanted. The down payment on what everyone assumed was their dream home. Then the monthly transfers into Nathan's checking account. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, landscaping, repairs. I never mentioned any of it. Not once, not even in an argument, and we had a few. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted peace in my house. That may have been the single greatest mistake of my life. People rarely value a blessing they've never had to earn, and I had spent 2 decades making sure my son never had to earn one. One of the movers came out carrying a box that had been left open at the top. I could see what was in it. Photo albums. Our wedding album, the leather one with the cracked spine that Eleanor's mother had given us. Claire followed my eyes and pointed at the driveway. "Those are yours. You packed our wedding albums. They're mostly your memories. Our memories." She shrugged, and it was such a small movement, so casual, so completely unbothered. "Not anymore. I have negotiated with men who would put a knife in your back over a parking easement, and I have never in my life been spoken to as carelessly as I was in that moment on my own front steps." Across the street, Ruth Whitfield stood frozen beside her mailbox, with a handful of envelopes she'd forgotten she was holding. She had watched Nathan grow up. She had put a bandage on his knee when he was 6 and wrecked his bike on her driveway. Our eyes met and hers were horrified. I gave her a small smile. There was no sense in anyone else being embarrassed. Humiliation is loud enough on its own. It doesn't need an audience adding commentary. I turned back to my son and held up my phone. "This text, we need distance from you. Please stop contacting us." "You meant it? We meant it." "All right, I believe you." Nathan blinked. "You're not going to argue?" "No." Claire looked, for just an instant, disappointed. She had prepared for a fight. She had probably scripted her half of it in the shower that morning. Instead, she got a 68-year-old man saying all right. And nothing unsettles a person like being handed exactly what they asked for. I took out my phone and opened my banking app, right there in front of them, and made a note for Monday morning. Then I looked at both of them. "Of course," I said, I'll cancel my direct deposits first thing tomorrow. Claire laughed, short and dismissive. Oh, please, Nathan rubbed his forehead. Dad, don't be dramatic. I'm not. Then I smiled, and I asked the question I had been holding since the moment I saw the new deadbolt. One more thing. Do you know who really owns this house? Claire burst out laughing. This again. Nathan chuckled and shook his head. Dad, the house is ours. I tilted my head. Is it? Neither of them heard the question hidden inside my answer. Neither of them had ever read a single page of a property document. Neither had ever wondered why the tax bill arrived every January in a sealed envelope addressed to someone else. Neither had ever asked why every contractor invoice, every insurance renewal, every HVAC service report came to my desk first. They simply assumed. Assumptions can become very expensive. I picked up Eleanor's rocking chair myself. It deserved better than being carried by strangers who didn't know whose hands had worn the arms of it smooth. I set it carefully in the bed of my truck and tied it down with a moving blanket underneath so it wouldn't scuff. Before I got in, I looked at my son one last time. He was standing on the top step with his wife beside him, in front of a door he could not have opened without a key that had been cut that morning. I hope, I said quietly, that one day you understand the difference between owning a house and being allowed to live in one. Then I drove away. Neither of them followed. Neither of them called. And neither of them knew that at 9 o'clock the next morning, I already had appointments with my attorney, my accountant, and the bank that had held one very specific secret for 23 years. By the time they understood what that secret was, they would wish they had never touched those locks. I spent that night at a small inn on Lake Norman, about 40 minutes north, in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and looked out over a marina where a few men were already loading tackle for the morning. It wasn't luxurious, it was quiet, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, nobody expected me to solve a problem before breakfast. I sat on the balcony with a cup of black coffee and looked at my phone. Nothing from Nathan, nothing from Claire. That surprised me more than any of it. Not because I expected an apology. Because I genuinely believed my son would want to know where his father was sleeping that night. He didn't ask. Not that night. Not the next. I opened the old leather wallet Eleanor had given me on our 25th anniversary. Inside, behind my license, was the same faded photograph I had carried for over 30 years. Eleanor sitting cross-legged on a blanket in our old backyard. A 2-year-old Nathan in her lap, both of them laughing at soap bubbles drifting past the camera. You saw it before I did, I told her. She had. She'd said it out loud, more than once, and I had smiled and changed the subject like a man who thinks love is a thing you can pour to a person indefinitely without ever changing what they become. Monday morning began exactly as planned. At 9 sharp, I walked into the downtown Charlotte office of Gerald Marsh, who had been my attorney for 25 years. He stood, shook my hand, and looked at the overnight bag by my feet. You look tired. I slept fine. You don't look like a man who slept fine. I smiled. My son changed the locks yesterday. Gerald didn't react dramatically. Good attorneys never do. He simply sat back down and asked quietly, did they finally cross the line? Yes. He nodded once. I've been afraid of this day for a while. That sentence caught me because it reminded me that Gerald had known the truth almost as long as I had. 23 years earlier, Eleanor had been dying. Ovarian cancer, stage 3 by the time anyone found it, which is how that particular disease prefers to introduce itself. Cancer doesn't only take the body, it takes your conversations. Instead of talking about where we'd retire, we talked about guardianship and trusts, and the future of a boy who was about to lose his mother. One evening she reached across the hospital bed and took my hand. Her grip had gotten so light by then. Promise me something, anything. Don't let money ruin our son. It won't, it can. She said it flatly, without drama, the way she said everything true. I frowned at her. He'll inherit enough to live comfortably his whole life. She shook her head slowly against the pillow. Walter, that's exactly what frightens me. I didn't understand. I told her so. If he believes everything simply becomes his, she said, he will never learn to be grateful for any of it. And a man who can't be grateful can't be happy. Not ever. Not with any amount. Those words followed me around for years afterward like a second shadow. 4 months after her funeral, I began restructuring every significant asset I owned. Not to hide money from my son. To protect my son from money. Gerald opened a thick blue folder on his desk. 4 words were printed across the cover. Ellison Family Legacy Trust. Everything is exactly as Eleanor wanted it, he said. I haven't touched a clause in 23 years. He slid a copy across the desk. I didn't need to read it. I'd had it memorized for 2 decades. After Eleanor died, I moved nearly everything I owned into that trust. The apartment buildings in Gastonia, 2 commercial office parks, the investment accounts, the cabin, and eventually, the house. Not because I wanted to deceive anyone, because ownership and responsibility are not the same thing, and I wanted my son to inherit both, not just the easier one. People imagine that wealthy families use trusts to run some kind of elaborate shell game. The truth is far more boring than that. Family trusts are ordinary in America. Thousands of families use them. They avoid probate. They protect property from creditors and from divorces nobody saw coming. They provide privacy. They help with taxes. And most importantly, they let a parent decide how and when assets pass to the next generation, instead of leaving it to the accident of a death certificate. Eleanor believed inheritance should reward maturity, not age. Sitting in Gerald's office that Monday morning, I thought she had never been more right about anything. The house itself had a history almost nobody knew. Nathan believed I'd bought it after I retired. That wasn't true. I had purchased the property through the trust 18 years earlier out of a bank foreclosure, back when it was a beautiful ruin with water damage running down the inside of 2 exterior walls. It took nearly 2 years to make it habitable. New plumbing, complete rewiring, a new roof, foundation work on the east corner that cost more than my first 3 apartment units combined. Every improvement was approved through the trust. Every contractor reported to me. Every invoice arrived in my office and left with my signature on it. And when Nathan married Claire, I called them both into that half-finished dining room and made them an offer. "It'll save you money while you get established," I said. "Stay as long as you need," that was the sentence. Word for word. I have replayed it 1,000 times since. Stay, not own, not inherit, stay. Apparently those words meant very different things depending on which side of the front door you were standing on. Gerald leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "I assume you want to begin withdrawing financial support." "I do. For the record, Walter." "Is this revenge?" I thought about the question honestly because he deserved an honest answer and because I wasn't entirely sure yet. "No," I said finally. "It's reality. I've been standing between my son and reality for 20 years. I'm going to step out of the way and let them meet." Gerald smiled. "I've always admired that about you. Reality doesn't shout at anybody. It just shows up." At noon I met my accountant, Priya Nakamura, in a conference room with a view of the light rail. She had managed my finances for 15 years, and she knew every recurring payment I had by heart. She adjusted her glasses when I sat down. "You've made your decision." "I have." She turned the monitor toward me, and the list went on and on and on. Monthly transfer to Nathan, property taxes, homeowner's insurance, utilities, all 4, landscaping contract, pool service, housekeeping payroll, security monitoring, pest control, internet and streaming, vehicle insurance on 2 cars that were not mine, annual assessments, seasonal decorating, holiday lighting installation, which I had genuinely forgotten I paid for. I stared at it. For years these had simply been line items, the mechanical background noise of taking care of my family. "Do you know the monthly total?" Priya asked quietly. "I've honestly never added it up." She clicked once. $18,462.17 per month. I sat back in the chair. "You've been carrying 3 generations of expenses on one signature," she said. I laughed, and it came out rougher than I meant it to. No wonder they think this is normal. To them, it isn't luxury. It's weather. It's just how the world is. Priya folded her hands on the table. "I need to ask you one question, and then I'll stop being your friend and go back to being your accountant." "Go ahead." "If Nathan called tomorrow morning and apologized, would you turn it all back on?" I thought about that far longer than she expected. Long enough that she started to look uncomfortable. "No," I said. Her eyebrows went up. "I'd forgive him in about 4 seconds," I said. "But I'm not going to rescue him from a lesson he's needed since he was 30 years old." Forgiveness and rescue are 2 different transactions. I spent 20 years confusing them. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Eleanor would approve." I hoped to God she was right, because sitting in that conference room I did not feel like a wise man. I felt like a father who had just cut the last rope, and I could not have told you whether I was saving my son or dropping him. By mid-afternoon I was at Piedmont Trust Bank, sitting across from Tom Ferris, who had been the branch manager since before Nathan graduated high school. He came around the desk to shake my hand. "Walter, good to see you. I need to stop several recurring transfers." "Not a problem." He pulled the accounts up on his screen, then paused. "All of them?" "All of them." He looked at me over the monitor. "Family situation?" "Unfortunately." Tom nodded once and started clicking. He didn't ask another question. Bankers learn the same lesson lawyers do, usually earlier. Money tells its own story, and it doesn't need you narrating over the top of it. Driving back north out of the city, I found myself remembering a Saturday when Nathan was 9 years old. Little League. He struck out 3 times in a row. The last one on a pitch so far outside the catcher had to reach for it, and he cried the entire way home with his hat pulled down over his face. "I'll never be good enough," he said. I pulled over on the shoulder next to a cornfield and turned around in my seat and told him something my own father told me on a loading dock in 1972. "The world doesn't owe you another chance. But if you keep showing up, life usually gives you one anyway." He wiped his face on his sleeve. By the next season, he was batting third. That boy understood perseverance. That boy understood that things had to be earned, because at 9 years old, nobody had yet made the mistake of handing him a life that arrived pre-assembled. So where had he gone? When exactly had encouragement curdled into expectation? When had gratitude become entitlement? I have turned that over for months now, and I still can't point to a single day. That's the thing nobody warns you about. There is no day. There's just 1,000 small mornings where you pay for something without mentioning it, and each one is nothing, and together, they are everything. That evening my phone finally buzzed. Not Nathan, not Claire, Ruth Whitfield. "Walter, I hope you don't mind me calling." "Of course not. I just wanted to be sure you were all right. Where you were sleeping." Something in my chest went tight, because she was the first person to ask. "I'm fine, Ruth. I've got a place on the lake for the month." She hesitated. "There's been a good deal of arguing over here today." I didn't say anything. The landscaping crew came this morning and left again. One of them told my husband nobody had paid them. "I see," and 2 delivery trucks turned around in the circle without unloading. I thanked her for checking on me. Before she hung up, she said quietly, "I've watched you raise that boy since he was 5 years old, Walter." "I know you have. I don't think he has any idea what you've done for him." "No," I said, looking out across the black water past my window. "Not yet. Eleanor would be sick over this." "Eleanor," I said, "would have seen it coming 10 years ago." "She did see it coming. I'm the one who didn't listen." After she hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Reality has a remarkable way of introducing itself when nobody is standing in front of it anymore. And by the end of that week, my son was going to receive an education that no amount of money could have purchased for him. Tuesday morning was unusually still. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch of the little rented cottage. The lake was flat as glass. A pair of ducks came across it without leaving anything behind but a widening line. For the first time in 4 decades, I had no schedule, no property inspections, no meetings, no family obligation waiting on the other side of lunch. It felt strange, not lonely exactly. Unfamiliar, the way a room feels when you finally take down a picture that hung there for 20 years. At 8:15, my banker called to confirm everything had processed. All of it, cleanly. For nearly 15 years, that deposit had landed in Nathan's checking account on the first business day of every month like sunrise. He never had to ask for it. I never had to be thanked for it. It simply appeared, and at some point he stopped wondering where it came from. The same way you stop wondering where the water in the tap comes from. At 10:42, my phone rang. Nathan. I looked at his name on the screen for a good 5 seconds before I answered. "Morning, Dad." His voice was tight, irritated, the voice of a man calling customer service about a billing error. "The transfer didn't come through. I know. What happened? I canceled it." A pause. "Why?" "You asked for distance." "What does that have to do with anything?" I almost laughed. "Everything, Nathan. It has to do with everything." "Dad, that's completely different. The money isn't about us talking." "No," I said, "it's about helping my family. And you've told me I'm not part of your family anymore. You put that in writing." He blew out a breath. "Come on, Dad." "No." Another silence, longer. Then his voice dropped and I heard something underneath it that I hadn't heard in years. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of it. "Claire's upset. I'm sorry to hear that. You can't just stop." "I already did. It was done before you woke up." His tone hardened again. because that's what people do when the ground shifts, and they'd rather be angry than afraid. So this is punishment? No, I said. It's a boundary, you wanted them. Now we both have one. He didn't answer. Finally, he muttered that he'd call me later. I'll be here, I said. The line went dead. About an hour later, Ruth called again. I hope I'm not being a busybody, you're not. Well, there's quite a show over here. The landscaping crew had come back and gone again. The pool company arrived, spoke to somebody at the door for about 90 seconds, and drove off with the truck still loaded. Walter, Ruth said, and she hesitated. Claire was out in the driveway shouting at the pool man. I imagine she might be. I don't think she understands why they're leaving. She kept saying there had to be a mistake. There wasn't. Ruth sighed. I've lived across from your family for 20 years. I have never heard that house so quiet at night. Neither had I. In 18 years I had never once heard it quiet, because I had spent 18 years paying for all the noise. By Wednesday afternoon, things had accelerated. Diego Ramos, the property manager I'd used for 12 years, called me from his truck. Wanted you to know. HVAC contractor stopped by for the seasonal service and wouldn't start. The account's closed. Thank you. They asked whether the homeowners wanted to reopen billing. What did you tell them? That only the legal owner could authorize that. Good. Diego hesitated. I also got a call from your daughter-in-law. I couldn't help smiling. What did she want? Copies of every maintenance contract on the property. And? I told her she isn't listed as the property owner, so I can't release anything to her. He chuckled a little uncomfortably. She didn't care for that answer. No, I said. I don't imagine she did. That evening, I drove out to see Marcus Reed, who ran a diner on a 2-lane road west of Statesville and who had been pouring me coffee for 11 years. We'd met through the Veterans Foundation. He'd been a medic in the First Gulf War and had the particular calm of a man who has already seen the worst version of a bad night. He filled a mug before I'd fully sat down. You've got that look. What look? The one that says you're carrying something and you haven't decided yet whether you're allowed to set it down. So I told him. Not the numbers, just the story. When I finished, he wiped the same clean spot on the counter 3 times. My father put his own dad off the farm once, he said. He did? Thought the old man was interfering. Too many opinions about the equipment, about the money, about how Dad raised us. Marcus shrugged. 6 months later, Dad found out Grandpa had been quietly covering half the operating loan out of his pension the whole time. Nobody knew, not even my mother. How did it end? Dad cried harder apologizing than Grandpa ever cried leaving. Marcus leaned on the counter. You know what Grandpa told him, he said? Pain teaches things comfort never will. And then he said the hard part. What was the hard part? He said, son, I'm not angry with you. I'm just done being the reason you never had to grow up. I sat with that for a while, turning the mug. Marcus, I said finally, can I ask you something I haven't been able to ask anybody? Go ahead. How do I know I'm not just punishing him? I keep telling everyone this is a boundary, Gerald. Priya, myself mostly. But part of me was standing on that porch Sunday afternoon, looking at my wife's rocking chair on the concrete, and part of me wanted them to hurt. That part isn't wisdom. I know exactly what that part is. Marcus didn't rush to comfort me, which is why I asked him and not somebody else. You want the truth or the nice version? The truth. Both things are in there. Course they are. You're not a saint. You're a man whose kid threw him out. He refilled my cup without being asked. But here's how you'll know which one's driving. When it starts costing him something real, you'll feel it. If you feel satisfied, that's the ugly part, steering. If it makes you sick and you still don't turn the money back on, that's the other thing. And what if I feel both? Marcus almost smiled. Then you're normal, Walter. Just don't let the ugly part pick the destination. Let it ride in the back. I have thought about that conversation more than any other from those weeks. Because 2 days later I got a call telling me the second car had been sold, and I did feel both. I felt a small, mean flicker of satisfaction that lasted maybe a second and a half, and then I felt sick for the rest of the afternoon. I did not turn the money back on. Thursday morning brought a call from my insurance agent. Walter, I need to verify something on the Myers Park property. Go ahead. We received a request to transfer the homeowner's policy into Nathan Ellison's name. I expected that. The application can't be completed. I know why. The ownership documents don't match the applicant. He paused. I assume you'd rather we didn't get into the ownership question with them directly. Not until it's legally necessary, I said. They'll get there on their own. Another piece had quietly fallen into place. Not because I pushed it, because I had finally stopped holding it up. Friday afternoon, 5 days after the locks were changed, my son's car came slowly up the gravel drive of the cottage. He looked terrible. Wrinkled shirt, 3 days of stubble, dark half-moons under his eyes. He stood on the porch steps while I finished watering a row of geraniums the owner had left in clay pots, and he waited, which was itself unusual. "You found me." I called Aunt Susan, I figured. Neither of us said anything for a while. A boat went by out on the water. "The power company wants a payment," he said finally. "I imagine they do." "The security system went offline Wednesday." "Yes, the housekeepers quit," I heard. He looked up at me then, and his face wasn't angry. It was baffled in the pure way a child is baffled. "Dad, why is everything connected to you?" I studied him. That question wasn't an accusation. It was the first genuine question he had asked me in probably a decade, and I understood that something inside my son had begun to move. I nodded at the second rocking chair on the porch. "Sit down." He sat. "Nathan, I want to ask you one thing before we go any further." "Okay, in all the years you lived in that house, 14 years, did you ever once, even out of idle curiosity, ask who paid for any of it?" He looked out at the lake for a long moment. "I guess I assumed." "I know you did." "I thought." He stopped, swallowed. "I thought it was just how things were. That's exactly what I was afraid of." "That's the whole thing, son. That's what your mother said to me in a hospital room when you were 14, and I told her she was being paranoid." He turned to look at me. "What did she say?" But before I could answer, his phone lit up on the arm of the chair, and Claire's voice came through it loud enough that I could hear every word from 4 feet away. Something about the insurance company. Something about a cancellation notice. Nathan closed his eyes for a second, and I watched an interesting thing happen on my son's face. Not loyalty, not defensiveness, exhaustion. "I'll be right back," he said into the phone, and hung up without waiting for a reply, which I had never once seen him do. He sat back down. He didn't look at me. "Dad, can I say something and you won't use it against me later?" "I'm not keeping score, Nathan. I never was. That's been the problem." He rubbed his palms on his knees. "The counselor thing, that wasn't." He stopped and started over. "There were 4 sessions. I went to 2. Claire went to all of them. The stuff about boundaries, the stuff she said on the porch, that came out of the sessions I wasn't in." I said nothing. I told her I didn't want to send the text. His voice was very quiet. "I told her twice. And then Friday you left for Asheville, and by Saturday afternoon the movers were booked, and I just—" He made a small, helpless gesture. "I let it happen, which is the same as doing it. I know that. That was the moment, if you want to know. Not the trust, not the lawyers. That right there on a rented porch was the moment I got some of my son back, because a man who says letting it happen is the same as doing it has already stopped lying to himself." "What aren't you telling me?" he asked. "There's something." Diego wouldn't talk to Claire. "The insurance company won't put the policy in my name. Something's wrong with the house." I took a long drink of coffee before I answered. "Nothing's wrong with the house," I said. "You've just never asked the right question about it." He left 20 minutes later with considerably more questions than he'd arrived with. I watched his taillights disappear down the road between the pines. For the first time since this began, I hadn't seen arrogance in my son's face. I'd seen uncertainty. And uncertainty, in my experience, is always the first crack in entitlement. Meanwhile, across town, my daughter-in-law was refusing to accept what Nathan had already begun to suspect. She still believed this was an old man's bluff, an elaborate performance that would collapse the moment somebody called it. Unfortunately for her, the County Register of Deeds has never had any interest in protecting anyone's assumptions. Monday morning brought a knock on the cottage door. It wasn't Nathan, it wasn't Claire. It was a courier with a clipboard. "Walter Ellison, that's me." He handed me a thick envelope and had me sign for it. The return address belonged to one of the larger firms in uptown Charlotte, the kind that puts 4 names on the letterhead and charges you for the privilege of reading them. I smiled before I opened it. Claire had hired an attorney. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window overlooking the water and read the whole thing twice. It was exactly what I expected. It accused me of financial coercion, emotional manipulation, retaliation against family members. It demanded that I immediately restore all financial support and that I provide documentation establishing that I had no ownership interest in the residence. At the bottom was a sentence that made me laugh out loud, alone in an empty rented cottage. Our clients are the rightful owners and occupants of the property. Well, I said to the lake, you're about to learn the difference between believing something and proving it. An hour later, I was in Gerald's office. He read the letter without changing expression once, which is a talent, then slid it back across the desk. They're bluffing. I thought so. They're hoping you'll panic and settle before anybody pulls the deed. Which tells me something interesting. What's that? It tells me nobody in that house has looked at the county records yet. He tapped the letter. This was written from a client's version of events. No competent property attorney sends this letter after checking. He sent it before because the client was certain. And certain clients are very persuasive, right up until they're expensive. So what do we do? Gerald folded his hands. Nothing. Nothing. Walter, you've been playing offense your whole career and it's made you a wealthy man. But this is not that kind of situation. Their attorney is going to pull the property records within the week. Probably within days. And the moment he does, they stop arguing with you. And start arguing with reality. Exactly. Reality has a much better lawyer than either of us. That was why I had trusted Gerald Marsh for 25 years. He never dramatized the law. He didn't need to. Facts are enough, and a man who understands that will always beat a man who needs an audience. One question, I said. If they push it, if this actually reaches a courtroom, how does it look? Gerald considered. Honestly, bad for them, and not in the way they'd expect. It won't come down to who was rude to whom. It'll come down to a judge asking a very simple question of two people who contributed nothing toward the purchase, the renovation, the taxes, the insurance, or the maintenance of a property, and then asserted an ownership interest in it. He shrugged. You don't want to be the person answering that question. There isn't a good answer. 2 days later, he called me. They requested the records. That was faster than you thought. Their attorney's not an idiot. He's just been given bad information by a confident client. A pause. Walter, when this lands, it's going to land hard on your son. I know. Do you want me to soften anything? I looked out at the water for a long moment. No, I said. Softening it is what got us here. People imagine legal conflicts as courtroom scenes with raised voices and a gavel. Almost none of the important moments happen there. They happen in conference rooms with bad coffee and a computer monitor that somebody slowly turns around so the other person can read it themselves. That Thursday afternoon, across town, Nathan and Claire sat in their attorney's conference room. I wasn't there. Everything I know about what happened, my son told me weeks later, and he told me all of it, including the parts that didn't flatter him. The attorney's name was Alan Whitmore. Property law, 22 years of it. Claire didn't wait for pleasantries. My father-in-law is trying to force us out of our home. Whitmore nodded politely. Do you have the deed? It's our house. I understand that's your position. Do you have a copy of the deed? His name isn't anywhere on anything. Whitmore smiled the way professionals smile when they've heard a sentence before, and it has never once ended well. Let's verify that. He turned to his monitor, logged into the county property database, typed the Myers Park address and pressed enter. The room got very quiet. Claire leaned forward. What does it say? Whitmore didn't answer. He read the first page carefully. Then he opened a second document, then a third. Nathan said the silence stretched long enough that he could hear the HVAC cycling on. Well, Nathan finally said. Whitmore took off his glasses. The property is not owned by either of you. Claire's face didn't move. Then who is the legal owner? He looked back at the screen. The Ellison Family Legacy Trust. Who is that? Whitmore kept reading. It's a family trust, established 23 years ago under North Carolina law. Nathan shifted in his chair. Who controls it? Whitmore opened one last document and his eyebrows moved slightly, which for a man like that is the equivalent of standing up and shouting. The sole trustee, he said, and he looked directly at my son, is Walter Ellison. Nathan told me almost 30 seconds passed before anybody spoke. Then Claire laughed. That's not possible. Whitmore rotated the monitor toward them. It's a public record, Mrs. Ellison. You're welcome to read it yourself. She leaned in. There has to be another document, a later one. There isn't. What about our names? They don't appear on the deed. They've never appeared on the deed. The mortgage, then. We've been living there 14 years, there has to be. The property has been debt-free since 2011. The renovations. We put money into that kitchen. Every improvement I'm seeing here was approved and funded through the trust. Whitmore paused. Ma'am, I want to be clear with you, because it's going to save you money. There is no crack in this. This is one of the cleanest chains of title I've seen this year. Claire turned to her husband. You knew. Nathan shook his head slowly. He said later that his ears were ringing. No, he said, I didn't. Whitmore wasn't finished. He printed a page and slid it across the table. There's something else you should be aware of. This trust contains distribution conditions. Meaning what? Nathan asked. Meaning ownership doesn't transfer automatically on the trustee's death. There are terms. Claire folded her arms. Then when do we inherit it? Whitmore looked, my son said, genuinely uncomfortable for the first time. That depends entirely on the terms written by the grantors. He slid the papers across the table. Nathan admitted his hands were unsteady when he picked them up. The language was simple. Eleanor had insisted on that. She'd told Gerald she didn't want a single sentence in it, that a 25-year-old couldn't read without a dictionary. Because a document your child can't understand isn't a gift, it's a trap. The residence and the remaining trust properties would pass to Nathan Ellison, only upon a documented demonstration of responsible financial management, sustained lawful employment, absence of significant legal judgments, and the maintenance of a respectful relationship with surviving immediate family. Claire stared at the last clause. That's absurd. Whether it's absurd or not, Whitmore said quietly, it's enforceable. Conditional distribution provisions are extremely common, and North Carolina courts uphold them routinely. So because he says we weren't respectful, it doesn't matter what he says. What? The trustee has documentation. Whitmore was scrolling, financial records, correspondence, property expense ledgers going back. He stopped and looked up. This appears to be a continuous record spanning more than 20 years. Mrs. Ellison, I have to tell you as your counsel, I would not take this to a judge, not for a fee, not for a contingency, not at all. For the first time since I had known her, Claire Ellison had nothing to say. Late that afternoon, Gerald called me. They know. How did they take it? About how you'd expect. Their attorney withdrew an hour later. And Nathan? Gerald hesitated. He asked a question. What was it? He asked. Why didn't my father ever tell me? I looked out across the lake, where the light was going gold and low over the water. There it was. Not rage, not denial, not a threat, confusion. Sometimes confusion is far healthier than certainty, particularly when the certainty was built on 20 years of never asking. The next morning, my phone rang and it was my son, and his voice was completely different. Quiet, careful. The voice of a man walking into a room in the dark. Dad, good morning. I met with an attorney yesterday. I know. You knew? I assumed. He was quiet for a second. The trust. Yes. Is it real? It's real. You own the house. The trust owns the house, but you're the trustee. I am. A long breath on the other end. I don't understand. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I had known that question was coming for 23 years, and I still had to sit with it a moment. Because you never asked, I said. Not once, Nathan. Not in 14 years of living there. You've asked me for a great many things. You never asked me about a single one of them. Silence. I know what you thought. I grew up in that house. You did. You always said it would stay in the family. It will. I meant that. I've never said one word to you that wasn't true. He sounded almost desperate. Then why all the conditions? I closed my eyes. Because your mother asked me to protect you. From what? From believing that love and entitlement were the same thing. He didn't answer for a long time. Did Mom really write that? Those terms? Those were hers? Every word of the conditions was hers. I argued with her about 2 of them in a hospital room 4 weeks before she died. I lost both arguments. I smiled a little and it hurt. I always lost arguments with your mother, son. It's the only thing I ever really enjoyed losing. His breathing had gone uneven. I've never seen those documents. No, you weren't meant to, not until it mattered. Another long silence filled the line, and then he said something so quietly I nearly missed it. I think I made a terrible mistake. I did not rush to comfort him. Some realizations deserve a moment of silence, because when a person genuinely understands what they've done, that silence does more work than any lecture a father could give. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to fix his face for him. To say it's all right, son, it's water under the bridge. I have spent my whole life reaching for that sentence. I didn't reach for it. That was the hardest thing I did in all of this. Harder than the bank, harder than the porch. Nathan, I said finally, I love you, and I'm not fixing this one. But while guilt was beginning to soften my son, Claire was traveling in the opposite direction entirely. She wasn't interested in apologies. She was interested in a way around the trust, and in the process, she was about to make the largest mistake of the entire affair. Diego called me on a rainy Tuesday. Thought you should know. Mrs. Ellison came by the office. What did she want? Copies of every trust document. Formation papers, amendments, the schedule of assets. She had a folder with her, printouts from somewhere. She'd done homework. I told her those are confidential and I'm not the custodian anyway. He paused. She threatened to sue me. I figured. Then she threatened to report the trust. For what? She never got around to specifying. I sighed. When people run out of facts, Diego, they reach for threats. It's the last thing in the drawer. That's just about what it sounded like. After we hung up, I found myself less angry than tired. Claire wasn't fighting for a house anymore. Somewhere in the last 2 weeks, the house had stopped being the point. She was fighting to avoid saying 4 words out loud, and those 4 words were I was wrong about him. There is an enormous difference between those 2 fights, and almost nobody notices when they cross from one into the other. 3 days later, Gerald called with news. Her second attorney withdrew too. That was quick. He reviewed the trust for about 90 minutes and advised them they had no viable claim. He also told them something I wish I'd been in the room to hear. What's that? He told them that, if this ever reached a courtroom, the first question from the bench would be why 2 people who never contributed a dollar toward purchasing or maintaining a property believed they were entitled to own it, and that there is no answer to that question that a judge finds sympathetic. I laughed quietly. That must have been an uncomfortable 90 minutes. I imagine it was. Meanwhile, reality kept doing the only thing reality knows how to do. It arrived. Without emotion, without vengeance, without any assistance from me, one bill at a time. The homeowner's insurance renewal came due and lapsed. The utility companies required deposits before restoring service, the way they do for any account with no payment history. The pool developed a filtration failure that ran nearly $6,000. A storm came through the second week of November and took down 3 oak limbs across the back fence, and the removal estimate was north of $8,000. For the first time in their entire marriage, my son and his wife had to make financial decisions, without the silent assumption that somebody else would quietly take care of it before the due date. According to Ruth, the larger SUV went first, then the boat. A month later, the second car was gone too. The neighborhood whispered about all of it. I didn't participate. People lose enough dignity in a season like that, without spectators supplying commentary. About 6 weeks after I left that house, Nathan asked if we could meet. Not at the house, not at the cottage. At the cemetery. I got there 15 minutes early, the way I always do. Eleanor's headstone sits under a maple that had gone the color of a struck match, and the whole hillside was covered in leaves that hadn't been cleared yet. I laid white roses against the granite. She never liked red ones. She said they were what men bought when they hadn't been paying attention. A few minutes later, Nathan came up the hill, walking slowly, and he looked different. Not older. Something inside him had rearranged itself, and it showed in the way he carried his shoulders. He was holding a cardboard box. He set it on the bench between us without a word. What is it? He opened the lid. Inside were journals, dozens of them, cheap composition books, some of them water-stained at the corners, and I recognized the handwriting on the first cover before I'd taken a full breath. I found them in the attic, he said, behind the Christmas boxes. Claire was pulling things out to sell and he stopped. I found them. I thought they were lost. My voice didn't work right. I looked for those after the funeral. I looked for months. So did I, apparently. We were looking at the same time and neither of us said anything. That is the entire tragedy of my family in one sentence, if you want it. He sat down beside me on the bench. I've been reading them. Neither of us spoke for a while. Somewhere down the hill, a groundskeeper was running a leaf blower. Finally, he cleared his throat. I didn't know. Know what? Any of it. His voice cracked on the second word. I didn't even know she kept journals. She wrote almost every night. 20 minutes at the kitchen table after you were down. He nodded. I read one from when I was 7. He turned a book over in his hands. She wrote that you were working 16-hour days that year. I stayed quiet. She wrote that you sold your car. I did, the Corvette, the one in the picture in your office. You sold it to pay for St. Andrews. Yes. He looked down at his hands for a long moment. She wrote that after she got sick. His voice disappeared entirely. He had to start over. She wrote that you refinanced the Gastonia building so she'd never see a medical bill. She said you had them sent to the office. She said you sat in the car in the driveway some nights before you came in. I closed my eyes. Eleanor had promised me she would never tell him. She had looked me in the face and promised. Apparently, she'd only promised she wouldn't tell him while she was alive. I never knew, he whispered. I know. I thought you were just always successful. I thought that's what you were, successful. I smiled, and it was a sad thing. We struggled for 11 years, son. There was a stretch in '84 your mother and I split a sandwich for dinner 4 nights in a row so you could have swimming lessons at the Y. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because children shouldn't carry adult burdens. I watched the leaves come down. That was the rule your mother and I made when you were about 2. And I want you to understand something, Nathan, because this is the part I've had 6 weeks to think about. That rule was right when you were 9. It was right when you were 15. I turned to look at him. It was wrong when you were 30. And I never changed it. Because I liked being the man who made your life work. More than I wanted you to be a man who could make his own. Tears were running down his face, and he wasn't bothering to stop them. I thought everything just existed, he said. I know you did. I built it that way. I never asked where any of it came from. No, because I made sure you never had to. He picked up another journal and opened it to a page he'd marked with a receipt. There was one sentence I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Read it to me. His hands were shaking. He read his mother's handwriting out loud on a hillside in November. If Walter ever seems overprotective after I'm gone, I hope Nathan understands that it isn't because his father wants control. It's because loving someone completely always looks a little excessive to people who have never had to lose them. He couldn't finish. He set the journal down on his knee and put his face in his hands, and my son cried the way I hadn't heard since he was small. I've been so unfair to you. I put my hand on his shoulder. You've been human. No. He shook his head hard. No, Dad. I've been selfish. Don't do that. Don't make it easier. And I didn't, because he was right, and because growth begins at the exact moment a person names their own failure without anybody holding the pen for them. We sat on that bench until it got cold, and for a while neither of us said anything at all, and his mother's name was on the stone in front of us, and I thought, Eleanor, you were right about every single thing, and it only took me 23 years and 1 October to find out. A week later, something I did not expect happened. Claire called me. I almost didn't answer. I want to be honest about that, too. I looked at her name on the screen, and I let it ring 3 times, while a part of me that I am not proud of considered letting it go to voicemail. Hello. For several seconds, she didn't say anything. I could hear her breathing. I owe you an apology, she said. I waited. I judged you before I knew you. I decided who you were in about the first 6 months, and then I spent 9 years collecting evidence for it. I didn't fill the silence. I have learned that filling silences is how you rescue people from the sentences they need to say. I convinced Nathan that accepting your help meant you expected control in return. That was me, that wasn't him. He defended you for years and I wore him down about it, and I want you to know that because I don't think he'll tell you. Still, I said nothing. Then her voice broke, and it was a real break, not a performance. My father left when I was 12. That caught me off guard. He left, and then for about 4 years he'd show up with things. A bike. School clothes once. A check to my mother that always came with a conversation attached to it about what she'd do differently. She stopped to steady herself. So I grew up understanding one thing about money, and it was this. Help always has a string on it, and if you can't see the string, you just haven't found it yet. I listened very carefully. So every time you paid for something, she said, and she sniffed. Every single time I was looking for the string. 14 years. I never found one. And instead of thinking maybe there isn't one, I thought. She laughed, and it was awful. I thought you were just better at hiding it than he was. I thought you were keeping score somewhere I couldn't see. I wasn't, I said. I know that now. How? She took a shaky breath. I read the journals, too. Nathan showed me. There's an entry from 2009. She wrote about you sitting up with him the night before his LSAT, and she wrote, Claire stopped. She wrote that you'd been up since 4, with a leak in one of the buildings, and you never mentioned it to him. Because you didn't want him distracted. That's true, that happened. There was no score, was there? There was never a ledger. There was a ledger, I said. Priya keeps very good books. But it was never a ledger about what you two owed me. It was a ledger about what I could still afford to give. She cried for a while then, and I let her. I'm sorry, Walter. And for the first time since any of this began, I believed her. Not because of the words. Because there was no anger left underneath them. Only regret. And regret has a completely different weight to it than anger does. You can hear it. A few days later, Nathan invited me to dinner. Not at the house. They'd moved into a rented 3-bedroom on the east side of town, a brick ranch built in about 1962 with a carport instead of a garage. Nathan opened the door himself. There was no catering. No wine I'd have to pretend to have an opinion about. Just chili on the stove and cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, and a house that was about a quarter the size of the one they'd left. Claire met me in the hallway with a nervous smile. I hope you still like cornbread. I still like cornbread. The place was small and warm, and the radiator knocked. During dinner, nobody said the words trust or attorney or deed. We talked about the Panthers' offensive line. We talked about Eleanor's terrible attempt at a Thanksgiving goose in 1998. Nathan asked me about the veterans' retreat, and he actually listened to the answer, and asked a second question, which is how you can tell. At one point, I noticed my son standing at the sink washing dishes, without anybody asking him to, and Claire laughing at something with flour on her hands. That mansion in Myers Park had beautiful bones and a kitchen out of a magazine, and for 14 years it had echoed with a very particular kind of emptiness that I had paid $18,000 a month to maintain. This little rented ranch with the knocking radiator had something in it I had almost forgotten the sound of. Peace. I drove back toward the lake that night on I-77 with the heater on, and about halfway there I understood something that took my breath for a second and made me pull into a rest area to sit with it. The mansion had never been the inheritance. The mansion had never been the inheritance. It was only ever the test. The inheritance was the thing I watched happen at that sink. The inheritance was my son doing a small, unglamorous task without being asked, in a house he paid for himself, for a wife he was choosing all over again on harder terms. I sat in that rest area for 20 minutes, and then I called Gerald at home, which I had done maybe 3 times in 25 years. Walter, everything all right? I want to amend the trust. There was a pause. You've never changed a clause. You've told me 100 times you never would. Those were Eleanor's terms. I'm not changing her terms, I said. I'm adding one of my own. I want you to draft a discretionary provision. Effective immediately, at the trustee's sole judgment, the trust can begin making educational and matching contributions toward a primary residence that Nathan purchases and maintains himself. Dollar for dollar, up to a cap. He puts in $1 of his own money. The trust matches $1. Gerald was quiet, and then I heard the smile in his voice. So he still gets help. He gets a partner, I said. Not a landlord. There's a difference, and it took me 68 years and one very bad October to learn what it is. And the mansion? I looked out the windshield at the dark interstate. Sell it, I said, through the trust. It was a foreclosure when I bought it, and it can go back on the market clean. Put the proceeds into the trust corpus where they belong. He was never going to inherit that house, Gerald. He was going to inherit whatever kind of man the loss of it made him. And I think we're going to be all right. I did not tell Nathan about the matching provision that night, or that week, or for a long time. He found out about it the way I had always intended, not as a rescue that arrived before he'd tried, but as a hand that met his own only after his was already extended. 18 months later, when he and Claire had saved a real down payment on a real house on their own, a modest one, nothing like Myers Park, the trust met them halfway, and Nathan called me from the driveway of it, and he couldn't get a full sentence out. That is the only kind of help I will ever give my son again, the kind he has to reach for first. I want to tell you what I actually learned, because a story like this is worthless if it's only a story about a rich man and a trust and a clever twist at the Register of Deeds. Most of you watching don't have an 18-year-old foreclosure in a Myers Park land trust, and neither did I once. What you have is the same thing I had, which is people you love and 1,000 small daily chances to either help them grow or help them stay small, and those two things wear the exact same face. Here is the first thing, and it's the one that cost me the most. Love and rescue are not the same act. I spent 20 years believing that every time I removed an obstacle from my son's path, I was loving him. I wasn't. Half the time I was robbing him. An obstacle a young man overcomes becomes his confidence. An obstacle his father quietly removes at 4 in the morning becomes an expectation, and the boy never even knows the obstacle was there. I loved my son so efficiently that he never got to find out what he was capable of, and a person who never finds that out will always feel entitled, because entitlement is just the scar tissue that grows over the place where earned confidence was supposed to be. Here is the second thing. Generosity given in silence can turn into resentment received in silence. On both ends of it. I never told Nathan what things cost because I didn't want to burden him. But a gift nobody knows the weight of isn't experienced as a gift at all. It's experienced as gravity, as just how the world is. And Claire, standing on the other side of it with a childhood full of strings, couldn't see a gift with no string as anything but a string she hadn't located yet. My silence didn't protect anybody. It just left an empty space where the truth should have been, and other people's fears moved into it. Here is the third thing, and this one is for the parents watching, and the grandparents. Because I know you're out there. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. For most of my life, I thought a boundary was a small betrayal, a way of saying I'm choosing myself over you. That's exactly backward. The most loving thing I have ever done for my son I did on a Monday morning at a bank, and it looked, from the outside, like abandonment. Sometimes the deepest love available to you is to stop being the reason someone never has to grow up. Marcus's grandfather knew that on a farm 60 years ago. It took me a lot longer, and here is the last thing, and it's the one I'd carve on a wall if I could. It is almost never too late. I was 68 years old and standing on my own porch, looking at my dead wife's rocking chair set out with the trash, and I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had lost my son permanently and that all that was left was to be dignified about it. I was wrong. What looked like the end of my family was actually the first honest day it had had in 20 years. The distance that text message demanded turned out to be the exact distance we both needed in order to finally see each other clearly. Your version of this won't have a trust in it, but you have a porch, you have a bank, you have 1,000 4 in the morning obstacles you could stop quietly removing, and you have people you love who will never become who they're capable of becoming as long as you keep standing between them and the weight of their own lives. I'm not telling you to change your locks. I'm telling you to stop paying for locks you were never thanked for, and see who comes to find you. These days, I still live on the lake. I bought the little cottage from the man who rented it to me. It turned out he'd been trying to sell it for a year. It has 1 bedroom, a porch that faces east so the morning comes up over the water, and Eleanor's rocking chair in the corner by the window, where it belongs, where no stranger will ever carry it out to the curb again. Nathan and Claire come up most Sundays now. Not because a dinner is scheduled and paid for, because they want to. Claire brings cornbread. My son fixes whatever I've let fall apart during the week, and he won't take a dime for it. And I've learned to let him, because I finally understand that letting someone give to you is its own kind of love. And I spent too many years too proud to receive it. Last Sunday I caught Nathan standing at my window with the leather wallet open in his hand, looking at that faded photograph of his mother on the blanket with the bubbles. She really saw all of it coming, he said, didn't she? She saw everything before I did, I told him. Her whole life. It was the most frustrating thing about being married to her, and now it's the thing I miss the most. He put the wallet back exactly where he found it. Then he sat down in his mother's rocking chair, in my house without asking, and it didn't cost me $18,000 a month, and it was worth more than everything the trust holds put together. If you've made it all the way here with me, thank you. Truly. Stories like this one are the reason I share on this channel, and if it moved something in you, or reminded you of someone, do me a small favor. Subscribe, leave a comment about the person this made you think of, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fix a thing you were sure you'd lost. Somebody out there is standing on a porch tonight, certain the story is over. It isn't. Tell them. This story comes from my own heart and my own hands, written and told by a real person who has lived long enough to get some large things wrong and a few important things right at the last possible minute. The names, the places, and the details have been changed out of respect for the privacy of real families, and any resemblance to a specific person you know is the resemblance of a shared human experience, not a coincidence of biography. I don't tell these to make you angry at somebody. I tell them because every one of us is on some Sunday afternoon, either the father on the porch or the son who changed the locks, And most of us, if we're honest, have been both. Take care of the people you love. Let them earn things, and go find out who comes looking for you when you finally stop paying for the locks. I'll see you in the next one.